nice to meet you. I am Bailey. I'll be going over intermediate JavaScript lesson 1 with you today. Here's the schedule, and the rules. So be respectful, turn on your camera, use your first and optional last name, and keep one tab open during the class just so that we know everyone is on track with the lesson. All right, and the schedule for classes once you get back into regular classes, that will be from 4:15 to 5, we have the first part of class. Then from 5 to 5:10, we have a quick break. Most likely you'll go to the main room and do an icebreaker. Then from 5:10 to 5:45, that's the second half of class, and at 5:45, you guys are free to leave unless you have any questions for us. Okay, so for today, as an overview, we'll be going over beginning JavaScript, learning and creating functions, and then 3, create your own fish project. So we'll go through these steps slowly today. All right, as a review, question 1, variables. How do you define a variable? Question 2, what can be stored in a variable? Hint, there's 4 main types. 3, what does var draw function do? Try giving an example of how we used it in past projects. Take a moment to pause this video, and once you have your answers, unpause it. All right, so for our first question, we can define a variable by doing var name equals value, or var blank equals value. You set a variable name, and you can call on it later once it has been defined. You set it to a value, so any of the data types, and then you end it with a semicolon. Second question, what can be stored in a variable? That is a string, integer, boolean, and floats. Strings, if you recall from beginning JavaScript, those are words, sentences, or numbers, any characters within double quotes or single quotes, so they need to wrap it around. And Khan Academy, they should be highlighted green. An integer is a number, a whole number. So 15, -2, 0, 20, those are all considered integers. Really quick, I'm going to skip to floats before we get to booleans. Floats are very similar to integers, except they are a decimal number. So that could include 5.5, 2.9999, -72.3, etc. And then the last data type we have here is booleans, and that is a true or false condition. So for example, if it's raining outside, we have 2 options. Is it raining outside? True. Or is it not raining outside? False. There are 2 different outputs for one boolean. And then last question, what does var draw equals function do? Try giving an example of how we use it in past projects. So we're making a function called draw, and in past projects we've used it for animations. So elaborating on it a bit, if you recall in lesson 5 and 6 of beginning JavaScript, we made a dice game as well as a moving car. So this draw function works as a forever loop where it repeats and repeats over and over, and it makes it look like your project is being animated. All right, here is the review for creating a new program if you've forgotten. Go to khanacademy.org, so you can just search that up in your browser or go to this link. Then you can click save. It'll prompt you to name your project something. Then click save again, and you should have a project that you can view on your profile. If you have any questions about specifically making a JavaScript account, you can check out our video on that or check with your teacher the next lesson. All right, so functions. How would you draw a rectangle with lines without using the rectangle function? Please write out the steps. Think about each line of code you would have to write. And as a hint, there is a line function that draws a line between 2 points. Line x1, y1, x2, y2. So what this is trying to get us to understand is that a rectangle is not drawn by telling the project to just draw a rectangle. That rectangle function actually has a bunch of other instructions within it. It's just predefined for us inside of the JavaScript library. So moving on to the next slide. Oh, that's pretty tedious if you think about it, right? So consider we have 4 lines, right? 4 lines, and they all need to somehow connect with each other to make a rectangle. So it needs to be consistent every time we input 4 numbers. Within a rectangle function, we have x, y, w, and h. However, when it comes to lines, we have the same x, y, pairs of parameters. The problem is they need to all relate to each other in some shape, right? So luckily there's a pretty easy way to do that, and that's using functions. So we'll get into making our own functions. A function is a block of code that can be reused to do a specific action. JavaScript has built-in functions, like I've been saying, that you've been using. Rectangle, ellipse, fill, those are all functions. They're predefined inside of JavaScript's library. We don't need to actually tell the project what each of these things do. The program already knows, hey, rectangle means we take in these 4 parameters and we output a rectangle. No need for the user to manually write a fill line to write all 4 lines and have them connect to each other. Think of functions like a black box, sorry. Each takes an input, does something with it, then outputs something else. What it does with the input to get to the output does not matter to the user. So if you've heard of a black box before, this is essentially just a mystery, right? We get from step 1 to step 2, and then the in-between is what the program does. Because we are using these as predefined libraries, we don't actually have to think of them, especially when it comes to these predetermined things like rectangle. Technically, for rectangle, when we put in these 4 parameters, it takes these 4 parameters and it puts them into this function that JavaScript already has, and it says, this is how each of these parameters work together to draw all 4 lines of a rectangle. Or in some cases, if you use a 5th parameter, even the radius. So this black box is not something that we've considered, but actually coming to today, to make your own function, you are going to be working with specifically that black box and how to take those inputs and output it into something your own. All right, how to call / use a function. Name of function parameters, right? So you know how this works with a rectangle. You can replace this with any of the functions we've learned so far. Name of function, the parentheses, semicolon. For example, let's use no stroke. No stroke has just no capital S, right? No stroke. Parameters, there's no parameters for no stroke because we don't need to take in any information. The only thing no stroke needs to know is if you call it or if you don't. In this case, there is no parameters. However, for an ellipse function, you could say ellipse, then you have those parentheses, x, y, w, h, those are our parameters, semicolon. We will be using this idea to make our own functions in the next few slides. All right, and here is the code to create your own function. Var blank is equal to function, parameter, or however many parameters that are actually required inside of our function. And then within those 2 curly brackets, we put in our actual code of the function. Breaking this down real quick, you notice at the start we have a var. This means that we are creating a new function. So var blank is the name of your function. Let's say, for example, I want to make a function that plays the piano for me. So I can say var play piano is equal to function. Some parameters I might need to intake is what song I want, how loud I want it to be, how fast, etc., etc. So those are my parameters, right? Within the curly brackets is where I actually tell the program what to do with each of those parameters I put in. So let's actually get into an example for what parameters are. These are things that we put into a function. So our inputs, they are only used inside of the function. So whatever parameters you call on cannot be called outside of the function curly brackets. In our function, we treat them just like we treat a normal variable. For example, inside of my rect function, I have x, y, width, and height. And if I were to actually draw out to what a rectangle function would look like, if I was declaring my own, I could say var rect equals function x, y, w, h. All right, it might not show up as I write it. So right there in the top left corner, var rectangle equals function x, y, w, h, closing parentheses, then the curly bracket pair, and the ending with the semicolon. This, whenever we call on it, once we actually have a project and we call on our rectangle function, would output like this. We would call on it by saying rectangle and then input numbers for each of these. So that way, whatever code I have in the middle that tells the project what to do with each of these numbers, it takes this x here and it puts it up here, right? That's because these are the same thing. The rect equals function. This is the exact same as what this is right here. They symbolize the same thing. They're both saying we have a function name and we have these 4 parameters. The difference is with the first one, we are declaring, oh, I just deleted it, oops. With the first one, we are declaring how those parameters interact with each other. All right, And we will be going over one more shape. So we have learned already ellipse and rectangles. We've used them the entirety of JavaScript's beginning class. Here we'll be learning how a triangle works. It's not the same, and you'll see here how. A triangle is another shape function like ellipse and rect. The main difference is that we have pairs of coordinates rather than just one pair of coordinate and then the width and height. So each pair of parameters is a set of coordinates. So you can see here x1, y1, that is considered one coordinate. And because triangles have 3 coordinates, right? We have 3 pairs of coordinates. Sorry, 3 points, 3 pairs of coordinates. So right here, we have on the right, let me annotate function. Oops, hold on. All right, we have a triangle function, as you can see right here. Triangle x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3. So we can take these in and say this is point A. I'll say this is point A. This is point B. And this is point C. All right. So here on line 1, we have a fill command. That's just the output is on my left side this time. Oh, I don't know if my camera's mirrored. Sorry. Line 2, triangle is 50, 50, 350, 350, 50, 350. All right, it looks like a lot of numbers, but we'll see how they all interact. x1, y1. So if we remember how the basic coordinate plane works, we take in the x value first. So x is 50. So if we know 200 is about the middle, so that means 50 is like 1/8, I believe. I'm doing my math right. 50 would be here on the x-axis. X, and here is the y-axis. So we know that the first point is going to be somewhere on this vertical line. Then we have the y value, which is also 50. So also 1/8 down the page, which will be here, 50, 50. And as you can see, that matches up with my first x1, y1 pair. You can apply the same concept to all the other coordinate planes. 350, 350 is down here on this point, and 50, 350 is right here on this point. You'll notice that the numbers repeat because we're keeping it all as a right triangle. Here we have 50, 50, they are on the same axis, which means this is a straight line. Here, 350, 350 means it's on the same same y-axis, yes. It'll be on this line, going this way, and it just has different x points. So they all relate to each other some way, and we'll get into the math for that later on inside of our projects. All right, so we'll be doing a fish project today. And how it's going to work is we are making a function that draws fish using a few different parameters. So rather than just drawing a fish on your project, which we don't want to do, we want to have a command that if we write fish parameters, it'll automatically have a fish drawn for us. So we will define our own fish function. Then we will create how these parameters work together. Then the last step is to actually output that and fill the color of the fish and print it out onto our project. So I'll show you an example of what that might look like. If it'll load, go ahead and bring up Khan Academy now if you have not already. All right, so here's my example. We have a bunch of fishes here, and the coolest thing here is that all of these fishes, they are all called on using a single line. All of them look something like fish, parentheses, comma, 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 however many parameters there are, semicolon, and each of those outputs a fish. You can see that they all relate to each other, as in every shape has some sort of relation to all the other shapes that consist in a fish. For example, all fishes are connected by a triangle and a circle directly at the middle point of the fish. All the eyes are proportional for where the fish's size is, regardless if it's tall, like super long, you know, you get the gist. And you can also see here with my multiple fishes, there are different sizes. And this one right here, the pink fish at the bottom, magenta, the tail is also proportionate to how long the body is. You can see here that if my body is a lot longer, then the tail is also a proportion of the body. Same thing if you take a smaller fish, where this is a much smaller proportion in comparison to this tail, but it still looks proportionate, and even we are using one command for that. So going back to the instructions slide. All right. The first thing you are going to do is to make a function that draws a fish. So if you recall, if you need to, you can also go check out earlier in the video how to define a function if you have forgotten. A function should look like var fish equals function xy, and then our variables for this one, we'll call them body width and body height just to keep track of what they are. Parameters are up to you. I forgot to mention, they are variable. So that means you can name them depending on how you end up using your function. So as I said earlier with my piano example, if I had a var piano, my parameters would be named different than right here. It would not be xy body width and body height. It might be sound, tempo, song, etc. So those parameters are up for you to name. And remember, the ellipse command is xy width and height. Triangle, as we just reviewed, that it is x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3. So take this moment, if you think you can start here, make that new project, save it, title it fish project or something along those lines, and unpause the video when you are done. All right, so we're gonna go through this each step of this really quickly. So here we have var fish equals function. So this is what you should already have your code and according to the slide before this. Var fish equals function xy body width body height. So breaking this down real quick, this should be line, sorry. This is line 1, this is line 2. This we are not going to do yet. This is just the first step. And this is line, we'll say this is line 4 just to give an extra line there. And this is line 5. So here for line 1, var fish equals function xy body width body height. Here we declare our function, it's called fish. And our function has xy body width body height. It has 4 parameters. So you can see this directly correlates with down here in line 5, our name is fish, and we have 4 parameters. Here we have an ellipse and it just says xy body width body height. And if I put this inside of code, which I will do real quickly. Okay, need to get rid of the annotation. It's in the way. All right, there we go. So new program, varfish function. You can see here, if I change any of these values, it acts just like a normal ellipse, which is great. We want that to happen. Anytime we change any of these values, it takes these values, sends it back up to the function, and it outputs it into right here what we see on the screen. So this is the exact same thing if I had called an ellipse that said these exact parameters, and that's because inside of our function, all we have done so far is add an ellipse. The next step you're going to take, if you're currently stuck and you didn't have this down already, the next thing you're going to do is add in that triangle in the body. So go ahead and pause this video to work on that and then come back once you're ready. All right, so we're going to move on to the tail. So step 2 here, we declare 2 new variables. We have a variable called tail width and a variable called tail height. Tail width is a quarter of the body width, and this is, again, to keep everything proportional. It does not have to be divided by 4 specifically, and if it was not, anything works for you. It could be a different proportion. That is up to your own preference, but just as a general statement, divided by 4 is how I'm going to, these numbers are how I'm going to speak about it. The next line, we have var tail height equals body height divided by 2, and again, this is keeping things proportional. If you recall, a triangle, let's see, let me draw a fish. This is my fish, this is his eyeball, and this is his. So our tail width must be a quarter of our body. So this is saying this right here is 1/4, my garage is open, of this one whole fish. So the body of the fish and then the tail is a quarter. The tail height is a half of the body height. So if you recall with an ellipse, we have that half here just to represent how far we're going from the height. So the height needs to be a half each going down from the center of our fish, because the center of an ellipse is considered in the middle. Then we have the triangle, and this might look a little bit intimidating, so we're going to go ahead and skip to the next slide for that. All right, let's break this down. There's a lot of stuff on this slide. Triangle here on the very top is our triangle function. So this is just the standard function we would use just for any triangle. So even when we're calling on a triangle here, you can see how each of these matches with the correct color. Should be color coded if you can see it. x1, y1, this is an x1, y1 pair. X minus body width divided by 2, comma, y. So that is the first coordinate. This is the second coordinate. Write that down. 1, 2, and this is the third coordinate. So let's give an example with the first coordinate pair. X minus body width divided by 2, comma, y. The x value will be at the left of the fish body. So this means we are taking half of the fish body, right? Because the fish, the x value of the fish, if you recall, we take that coordinate from the center of the fish. An ellipse determines the very center point of any circle. So let's say if I had 200, 200, the center of my ellipse is going to be in the center of the screen, not the top right corner, bottom right corner, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just mark the center here again, and we take half of the body, and that's where we do the x value of our first point. So if you recall, x values, this is 0, this is 400, and my fish value, I put 200. This is a fill command, we'll ignore this for now. So 200, this is the value of the fish, because if you recall, our ellipse is just x, y, body width, body height. So nothing has changed. It's the exact same thing as if we just outputted a circle. 200, comma, 200. So this is definitely the middle of the screen, looking at that. If we are taking half of the body and we're going half of it to the left, because subtraction makes you go closer to 0. So if we subtract from it a larger number like 200, we subtract, and it doesn't matter how big the number is, it's still going to go left, right? We're subtracting half of the body width, and that's where we're plotting our first point. So half of the body width is, you know, half of this right here. So we're going half of that backwards to plot this x value. And the y value is at the same y level as the original circle. You can apply this concept to all of these parameters. So x minus body width divided by 2 minus tail width, that will give you another specific point, and then the y value, y minus tail height, so on and so forth. You can take this time if you need to go through each of these parameters, but just think of it as the 2 coordinate pairs, and it should make things a lot easier. All right, we'll move on. Okay, adding colors. Add a body color parameter to the function and use fill body color to fill your shapes with colors. The body color parameter will need to look like this: color 255 234 23, because you need to tell the computer that it is actually a color. For example, calling the fish function, you would have those body color, you would add that into one of the original parameters. So remember, at the very top of our function, we have var fish equals function, x, y, body width, body height. The fifth parameter we are adding here is the color parameter, and we can just add that by writing color, right, body color. Then when you actually output it into your function, once we call on it, you can write fish, and then, you would write fish, the coordinates and the width and height of your fish, then you add that color. You should be able to see a color picker when it shows up. If not, you would manually type in those numbers onto the screen just using a fill command. All right, if you are done early, here are some extra challenges you can try. You can add to the scenery of the background, create a function to draw bubbles or seaweed, and add that to your project. So adding in more of your own custom functions. Or you can animate your fish and bubbles. Use var draw function and another variable to make your fish move. This is a little difficult. Be careful with this because we are working with a bunch of adding x and y mover values to your project. So be careful when you're doing this and be sure to save your project. And I think that's actually the next slide. So I'm going to go over the actual answers we have for our project. Can find it. All right. Okay, fish drawing function. We don't, if you want to do this, add your name at the top. This is good, just keeping comments to, my words aren't coming out. To properly order your code, I suppose that would work. So here we have the var fish equals function. You should have this here already if you've gone through all of the steps with the body color function at the end. So the original 4. And I'm going to show you what the output should look like first. So right here, did I open it? All right, line 32, at least for me, we have fish 200, 100, all these numbers for the parameter, and then we have a color function, which there is actually a color picker. So you can see everything is changing there. Then we call on the fish function so many times, and each of them, they all have different values. But you can see that we only have to call on one line to draw a fish, rather than repeating a bunch of commands to draw fishes over and over and over. And why would you do that when you instead could just have one function to draw fish and then call on that command? This way is a lot easier. You don't have a bunch of like specialized lines for one specific type of fish. Because you can see if I alter any of the width or height, let's take the green one up. I'll just do the red one, it's easier to see. So this one, even when I grow longer, all of the parameters work together to create my fish, right? Everything is proportionate. My fish still has the eyeball in that specific spot. The tail is still 1/4 of the body width. My height and my eyes are also proportionate. So let's say, for example, I make my height go bigger, my eyes grow bigger as well. If I make my height smaller, the eyes go smaller as well. So this is a really good use for a function. We have no stroke just to keep everything look like they are an entire entity of a fish rather than separate shapes. Fill body color, as you saw earlier on the body color slide. Then we have a body command, so ellipse, xy body with body height. That's just the standard 4 parameters we added in the original function. Lines 19 to 20, we have the declarations, 19 to 21 is the tail, right? And I went over that going through each specific parameter for our fish function. Line 26 to 27 is when we add in the eye. And our eye is very similar to the triangle, except it might be easier for you to understand if you've worked with ellipses longer, using the x and y values to change. And depending on our body height, we have it proportionate, have the the width and height values proportionate and as a circular, because they are the same value, according to our body height. So let's say, for example, for the blue fish right here, because it is 20, that means my body height here is 20 as well. 20 divided by 5 is 4, so this means this blue fish's eyeball is a 4x4 circle. That's pretty cool. You can also apply the same thing to our x value here. X plus body width divided by 4. So we're taking our x value, let's take my yellow circle, so this is the center of my yellow circle, plus 1/4 of the body width, right? Because we can just imagine this as body width and then 1/4 of it. So I'm going to refer to it as that rather than divided by 4. 1/4 of the body width. So we add that, and when we're adding, we're going to the right because we're getting closer to 400, not closer to 0. So I'm adding 1/4 of the body height. So that means my x value, which you can see here, obviously it's already there because it's inside by my function. My x value is going to be 1/4 in comparison from the center of the ellipse, the body. If you have any questions about this project, you should check in with your teachers. Otherwise, double check to make sure you have all parts. So you have the functions, you have all of the closing brackets and semicolons. And if there's any syntax issues, the O knows everybody might be able to help you. Otherwise, you should go to office hours, which is this slide right here. Tuesday and Sunday office hours from 4:15 to 5:15 on Tuesdays and Sundays if you are taking a fall and spring class. Summer classes do not have office hours, at least not in the time I'm making this video. Your teachers will also send you information about these meetings as well. All right, so before we finish, there's a really quick recap. So think of these questions, and once you have thought of the answers, feel free to unpause the video once I go over them. What are parameters? Okay, it actually just has the answers. So I'll read out the answers out loud as well, and then I'll explain how they work. Parameters are the inputs you put inside of a function, and you place them inside the parentheses. And then the second question asks, how do you create your own function? And we should be familiar with this because we just created our own fish function. Var name equals function, parameters inside of the parentheses. Then we have the curly brackets, and inside of our curly brackets, we have all the instructions on how to make that specific function. So going back to the first question here, parameters are the inputs you put inside the function. And that's true. Remember our fish function? At the bottom, if we call on it fish, then we have a certain amount of parameters that needs to match the very first line of parameters. So x, y, body with body height are the corresponding parameters to when we actually call on the specific numbers. And yes, you place them inside of parentheses. So if you don't have any other questions, you are free to go. I'm talking like this is a class, this is a video. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in intermediate lesson 2. Thank you so much and have a good day.